welcome everyone. So welcome to this ICTS seminar. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Tripta Bhatia speaking today. So Tripta did a PhD from the Raman Research Institute, working with Professor Amy Matsudna and Yashodhan Hatolne. She was working as a postdoctoral scientist at Memphis in Denmark for a couple of years. And since 2016, she's at the Max Planck Institute for Colloids and Interfaces in Potsdam, Germany. So Tripta is a soft matter theorist and experimentalist, as she tells me. And today she'll tell us more about membranes, how membrane organization affects their function and dynamics. Tripta, hand over to you.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to participate in this seminar, and I'm going to talk about life as a matter of fact. And there are three main words here: life, matter, fact. And it will be clear to you what do I mean by that and how they are connected. So, in general, when we talk about life, we as a human, or we are also social animals. So basically, it's controversial, but it goes back to a common root where they say that all the three kingdoms of life have a common root. And nevertheless, there might be difference in appearance, functioning, but if we go to the matter that they are made up of, which is non-living, so that we can always qualify into few sections like sugars, amino acid, nucleotides, fatty acid, or fats. And then these small molecules assemble or link together to form larger macromolecules, like in the aqueous solutions of, it's always in water or some or other solutes. So they combine and form polysaccharide, proteins, polynucleotide, and fats are special because they do not form a chemical linkage, but they self-assemble. So this is what I mean by matter. Now, how the matter, which is completely non-living, give rise to a life? This is the very big question that everybody wants to know. And I will be talking mostly about fats. And the title of my talk actually is also happened to be the title of the book of one of my collaborators. And this mainly tells you a lot of things about fats and membranes, but not about the things that I'm going to tell you today in my talk, because these are some recent data that insights that we got. All of these materials or macromolecules, they widely fall into soft matter systems. So biological systems are soft matter system. So everybody nowadays know about virus, coronavirus. So it is a kind of biocolloid. And soft matter systems are designed by nature to function on small scales. And to understand their function, we could actually, as a physicist, try to understand it and see how we can tune it and modify it. So it relates the macroscopic quantities to the microscopic structure at different length and time scales. So one of the energy scale in the soft matter is thermal energy. Then the response to the stress is very large and mostly non-linear because the shear modulus is very, very low. So for solid, it goes in gigapascal. So they are very soft in that sense. And other example of biocolloids is like proteins suspended in the membrane, which in like a 2D liquid. And these membranes are what I will be talking today a lot. So in general, in cell, the membranes have proteins, different kind of proteins and different kinds of lipids. It is also bound with cytoskeleton at one of the side. And in general, if I want to know the structure of proteins or carbohydrates, which could be tagged to a lipid, they fall into a class of biopolymers and also the nucleotides. And they are linked together. The monomers are linked together. But the membrane is a little bit special in the sense that they are self-assembled and there is no bond. In a sense, like we have a bond between monomers in a polymer, there is no such bond exists, but it's a self-assembled structure, a dynamic, stable structure. in which the molecules are constantly moving. So for example, they are moving like we move laterally, like we walk. We can also flip. They can flip too. We can rotate, like I could rotate just with this chair and they rotate too. And then they also wobble. So they have a lot of motions. They have a very busy and stressful life like us, but they keep the membrane intact. But since they are very fluid and very dynamic, it's also a property of the membrane that is very useful for the cell if it get ruptured and it want to heal. So it helps to have this kind of flexible nature of the membrane. And here I show you a movie which is a movie of a cell-sized compartment composed of these lipids that we can buy. And then they form this cell-sized compartment and they show these visible fluctuations. And these are the fluctuations because the molecules in the solvent, they kick the membrane, the lipids, and then it's a like of random motion kicking due to thermal energies. So these are the thermal kicks that the membrane experience, and we can actually see it in the microscope because of the fact that it has a size which is in micron size of the cell. So what are the recent insight we have got? So I showed you a vesicle, which I call giant unilamellar. Unilamellar because it has one bilayer, and giant because it has size of the cell. So here I show you again, it was a giant vesicle, trust me. And then what I did was that I put them in a different sugar solution outside. So I prepare them in one kind of aqueous sugar solution, and then I put them in another aqueous sugar solution. And then due to the fact that they have different sugar across their bilayer, and if also the concentration is different or not different, but then if the membrane has some excess area and if they can get deflated, then they start to form these different kind of conformations, shape changes. They are again visible because of the size of the giant vesicle. So in general, any membrane or any shape, so it's a bag, a very flexible bag, and then I deform the bag. So it loses the volume from inside, it is deflated, and it can form various kind of structures. Now, if I want to just understand this shape transformation or morphology, that this is not something new because there are models that are there to explain this, that why such thin bag fluid membranes can change shape, and this is mostly described by mean curvature. But if we look at the bending energy, which is quadratic in m, there is also a small m, which is the spontaneous curvature. So it is quadratic because it doesn't matter you bend it like this or you bend it like this. If you bend it by the same amount, it costs the same energy. But then there is this spontaneous curvature, which is going to make a difference if it's non-zero. And then this is something which was not possible to measure before. So one can measure the mean curvature, but how do we measure the spontaneous curvature? And what are the magnitude of the spontaneous curvature? And what is the spontaneous curvature anyway? So these are some of the questions that we ask. The other parameter here is the bending rigidity, which is again depend on the membrane. So if I don't change the lipids, if I don't change the material, then I know the bending rigidity, and it just tells me how rigid or flexible the membrane is to deform. And so in general, the spontaneous curvature can have a range of values, but let us see what does it mean. So what is the spontaneous curvature of first GUV or the second GUV or these schematics? Is it same? Is it different? How do we measure it? So again, we think that spontaneous curvature is what quantify bilayer's asymmetry, and mostly local bilayer asymmetry, which can arise due to different molecular mechanism. In this movie, we had different sugar solution, facing the two leaflet of the bilayer. But it could be any other solute or any other reason for the two leaflets to be different. So when I say it's different, I mean it's asymmetric. Now, how the asymmetry can arise, one can think of different things, like if I have lipids which are very different head group in the two leaflet, or if I have two different sugar, or if I have different salts, or if I have a protein like this asymmetric bar protein which has a shape and it's only on one side of the leaflet, and then it try to make the membrane, because membrane is more flexible, and it tries to bend the membrane as per its shape, and then it gives a local spontaneous curvature, which is because of the shape of the protein. So there could be different mechanism. And I showed you that in the previous movie that the sugar asymmetry, they form buds, but in general, they can also form tubes. So this is also a giant vesicle, and this has doesn't have a sugar asymmetry, but it has different leaflet with the leaflet having different lipids in the different lipids. So in one of the lipid there is a higher amount of GM1, which is a glycolipid, and the other leaflet it's a lower amount. So glycolipid is a lipid with a larger head group, and that can give rise to tubulation. And other thing which is important is because it's coming from asymmetry, so it will be one of the obvious thing to think that what if I reverse the asymmetry? I can go from outbud to inbud? So the answer is yes, you can, because this is also a way to understand it, if it is because of the environment or because of the structure of the leaflet, or it's something else. So yes, we can reverse it. So for example, if I reverse the glycolipid concentration in the two leaflet, I could have out tubes, for example. Now, other thing which is important in such shape transformation is there is a bud or tubes, and then there is a GUV, which we call now mother vesicle with the bud, and then they are connected. So there is a neck, like we have a head and the body, and we have a neck. So these structures also have a neck, which connects the two parts. Now, that neck curvature is basically the mean curvature, which is written here. It's if I have a neck here which is closed, then the mean curvature of the neck is same as inverse of the radii of A and inverse of the radii of the B. So mean curvature of A and mean curvature of B. This will give me the mean curvature of the neck for a closed neck. And this neck that join the two compartment, one small and one big, is stable only if it satisfies this inequality. And it just because and since there is an outbud and an inbud, so we assign a different sign to differentiate between outbud and inbud. So we say that the spontaneous curvature is positive when it's an outbud, and the spontaneous curvature is negative when it's an inbud. So we have this neck stability condition, which defines when such a neck can be stable. So what I mean by stable is, you can try this experiment if you know how to make giant vesicles. And if you deflate it, you will see that because the interfaces are so soft, it is possible that they get deflated, but the neck is not closed. So it can just open and then close, open and then close. So when I say stable neck, which means that it's stable and it's closed, it doesn't open. So it has to satisfy this condition. And this is connected to the spontaneous curvature just from the fact that the curvature energy wants to be minimum. So we can have different shapes of buds, like it could be different shapes and size. So shape by shape, I mean that I could have a necklace with many spherules where they are connected in a linear manner, like you have in a polymer, you have monomers connected forming a polymer, and polymers can be linear or branched. So in the same way here also, these necklace can be linear and branch. And then we found that actually you can go from linear to the branch conformation. I will come to that. So when we see buds or when we see tubes, then since we have a neck which is closed and we have a neck stability condition which connects the geometry to the material parameter, we have a way to measure the spontaneous curvature. So this is how it is. This is how we proceed. So this is a movie where I deflate again. It was a spherical GUV and I deflate it. There are different sugars across the bilayer, and it will show you the formation of an outbud. Now, when I'm deflating it, what exactly is I'm doing? So these bilayers are actually permeable to water, but not to sugar. So when I have different sugars, and if I have a higher concentration outside, then the water wants to go out from inside, and then it's deflated. And the quantity that we measure, which we can get from the experiment, we can measure is the area of this vesicle before and after, and the volume before and after. So this is how we define reduced volume. And this is a little bit similar, like if you have a bottle in which you have some soda, which can generate some gas, and you put a balloon and it can inflate and deflate. So it can change its volume. So in this case, it's a closed compartment and I'm changing the volume, so it will deflate, and the size of the bud that will form, that from that size of the bud and size of the mother GUV, I can calculate what is my neck curvature, and then I can also calculate spontaneous curvature. So from theory, we had a model just from minimizing the bending energy, curvature energy. We have a model which says which by using which we can plot these diagrams, the reduced volume versus the dimensionless spontaneous curvature. So dimensionless spontaneous curvature means I just multiply the spontaneous curvature by the size of the vesicle, because that is the length scale we have. And then I get this phase diagram, and then I can put my experimental data on this phase diagram. Now there are these two lines, the red lines, and these are from theory. And these lines tells you which one is the stability region. So as long as I'm in the white region here, or I move here, like at constant reduced volume or at constant spontaneous curvature, I will change the shape. But the sooner I'm entered in the stability region, I will not change the shape. But then if I keep on increasing the spontaneous curvature, it will do something to the membrane or to the giant vesicle, and we will see what it can do. So it can actually fish in the neck if I keep on increasing, and if before that it was in this stability region, and we can actually fission the bud from the mother GUV. So we have a way of quantifying this once we see the buds, and then we can go back to this theory, and then we can put the experimental data on this. So remember the neck. So in general, there are different kinds of necks. So if I have a giant vesicle with 1 bud, 2 bud, 3 bud, so there are small spheres and large spheres. And in general, we can define mean curvature of the neck 2 ways, between the small and between the large small. And from the neck stability condition, if we use that, we can get the spontaneous curvature, because for an outbud, the neck curvature always has to be smaller than or equal to the spontaneous curvature. So then we can get an estimate of this. And we collect a lot of data. We have a good statistic, like hundreds of GUVs. And then we see what is the limit, what are the range of values we get. And from that, we estimate the spontaneous curvature. So I have analyzed a lot of GUVs, and this is experimental data. So these points, red and orange, are actually experimental data. So I calculate the reduced volume, I calculate the dimensionless spontaneous curvature. And then for different shapes that we have, I go back to these phase diagrams and put these points. For example, 1 + 1 is mother vesicle with 1 bud. 1 + 2 is mother vesicle with 2 bud. There is also schematic here. So for each shape, I can determine its stability region, where it's stable. I can determine where it was before it formed a closed neck. So in general, we have a good agreement between theory and experiment. So you can see most of the data points fall within the stability region, and some are outside where the neck is not stable yet. So from this, we get an estimate of the spontaneous curvature, which is close to 1 per micron inverse. Now, other thing I mentioned to you that these buds are very mobile, so they can go from linear to branched. So they just move along the membrane because it's the fluid membrane. And if I can have two buds, like 1+1 configuration giving a Mickey Mouse kind of face, but I could also have a linear chain, and it can go from this to this. It's stochastic. So there is certain probability associated with 1+1, and there is a certain probability with 2+0, and I can go from one to the other and back because it goes on by itself, and we can record it, and we have a certain probability, and we can also see this for long necklace.
Tripta, question?
Should I?
Yeah, question. So in the movie that we are showing right now, the buds are attaching and detaching to the mother vesicle, or they are all attached and it's just a 3D effect of being out of focus?
No, it's just 3D image being out of focus. So this vesicle is a vesicle which is which I showed before. So it is this one, linear. So out necklaces. So this has a necklace which actually, yeah, this has a necklace which is linear, and then the movie shows you that it goes from linear to the branch conformation. So the buds are not attaching and detaching, but it's just, they're just going. So there is one bud at one end, and then there are 4 buds at the other end. And these 4, out of these 4, one of them is just sliding. So they are going from linear to the branch. And the other one is just sliding on the membrane.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So there have been some estimate for different asymmetry due to environment and solutions and DNA. And these are just estimate. And basically they tells us that what the asymmetry can, how large size of the bud of the tube we could get from such asymmetry. And this has been studied, this has a long history of how 2 leaflet can have give rise to a spontaneous curvature. The other thing which I mentioned to you that, okay, we have asymmetry, and then we do something to this giant vesicle, we create asymmetry, and then what we do, whether we create an asymmetry in the leaflet with different kinds of lipids, or we create an asymmetry with different type of sugar solution, we can get buds or tubes. But what if we are in the stability regime where the shape is stable, neck is closed? What if we keep on increasing it? What will happen to the neck, or what will happen to the shape? So this was something explored parallelly. Jan was working with these proteins, which are GFP protein, which are his stack, and then he made the bilayer with lipids, which had which has an anchor which could link to this GFP his stack. So this here it's chemical linkage. So, but it's reversible. So he could add if he keeps on adding these GFP his tag in the solution, in the buffer, then they go on the membrane and they bind because they are anchor lipid. But if we reduce the concentration, then they also unbind. So we could see again like osmotic changes. Like previously I showed you deflation, and we could also inflate if we go the other way. So it's reversible. In the same way here, it is reversible. It can, when it attaches, it deforms the membrane and forms some kind of shape, again buds. But if I reduce the concentration outside, then they also detach, and then the membrane goes back to the previous shape. So here, by changing the amount of these GFP in the solution, he could measure the spontaneous curvature. It's the same way, like you see the buds, and then you measure the neck curvature, and then you know that the neck curvature, what it has, the stability condition, and from that you get a statistics of the values for the spontaneous curvature. And then there is this plot where we could actually go on changing the spontaneous curvature, because the more I add in the solution, the more it will be on the membrane. And then in that way, I keep on changing the asymmetry of the membrane, and I can change the spontaneous curvature. So at some point when a bud is formed and I'm in the stability regime, so then the shape cannot deform. So what does it do to the shape? So then it seems that it can actually fission the neck, and whether it will form a same size compartment or different size compartment, it actually depends on where I am in the phase diagram. So I showed you a phase diagram where I could go from a region which was outside the stability region to the region which was inside. And depending on where I am, I have different size of the bud, different size of the mother vesicle. But then there is a line where I have two equal size compartments. So if I have two equal size compartments and I keep on increasing the spontaneous curvature, it actually can fission the neck, and then I get two equal size compartment. And if I'm not having a reduced volume and the value of spontaneous curvature where I have to equally size, then I have fission, but now I have fission and resulting in a two different size compartment. And because membrane is a fluid, it can just reseal very fast. So here we show that if we increase the spontaneous curvature, there is a force across the neck, radially on the neck, and it can actually fission the neck, and we can have two compartments from one. So these are the different range of values for concentration of GFP that has been tried, and this is in the paper, and also the magnitude of the force. And it works. It works. So what if now I want to increase the complexity? So I showed you that we can measure the spontaneous curvature. If the moment we see a bilayer and there is an asymmetry and we see bud or tubes, we know that we can measure the spontaneous curvature. Then we can go on increasing the spontaneous curvature, and depending on where we are in the phase diagram, we could actually get a fission of the neck, and we can have two separate compartments. Now let's make it more complicated, because so far I just had sugars or glycolipid. Actually, I will come back to glycolipid because it's relevant to neurons. In case of neurons, the signal has to move really fast, so it is not just diffusion. So what is happening, one thing in neurons is that they have a very high amount of GM1, and then there are very high amount of sols asymmetry. So they have leaflet asymmetry in composition, and they also have solution in asymmetry in terms of the ions. Now, one of the ion pump that I have experienced working with is sodium potassium ATPase, which pumps sodium and potassium ion in the cell, because again, these ions cannot cross the membrane. But the plasma membrane is actually charged. It's not a neutral, because you have charged species, and there are different kinds of channels like potassium channel. There are also different kinds of ion pumps, but this is one of the pump I will be talking. So in general, if I have a charge across the membrane, and if I have a concentration different, they both contribute to the Gibbs free energy. And then we can measure this potential by using a voltmeter. And actually this is the potential which helps in propagation of the action potential. So we started with not having ions, but just having glycolipid. And this is the same movie I showed you before, that the moment we have more amount of glycolipid in one and the other less in other, we see tubulation. So we already started seeing tubulation, which you see in nerves. So it's not bad. And then how to understand it. So these tubules were really, we could not say that if they were cylinders or if they could be having these kind of spherules. Like I showed you, like I had necklace. So we cannot say that if it's a necklace or if it's a cylinder. But what we know is that it's something coming from the bilayer asymmetry. And then we could quantify, if we want to quantify the size of these tubes or the diameter, then we could quantify if we measure the spontaneous curvature. Now in this case, we have a different method to measure the spontaneous curvature. And the way we do it is we use micropipette aspiration. So let's say initially we have tubes and the GUV is just freely floating and these tubules are stabilized. Now, when we try to aspirate this mother GUV, what will happen is, since these tubules are stabilized by the spontaneous tension and they are the region of high curvature, and they are connected to the mother GUV, so they will flow in first. So we start to we can measure the tension which is required to stabilize them by aspirating them. So that is what I plot here. The delta P is the aspiration pressure, and delta del R, it's this quantity, which I don't write here, but it's just this quantity. And it's a geometric quantity which depends on the size of the aspirated part and size of the part which is outside the pipette. And then we plot this, and from the slope, we get an estimate of the spontaneous tension, from which we can calculate the spontaneous curvature, from which we can calculate the size of the tubules. So we do it for two different concentration of GM1, and we get spontaneous curvature in this range. And then we also get the size of the tubes. So these are not optically resolvable, but we have an indirect way of knowing the diameter. So if we don't have tubes, we know that we cannot aspirate the GUVs if we have the tubes. So like in red blood cells or white blood cells, they have to travel a lot in our veins. They have a lifespan of 120 days, and they might be traveling like 400 kilometers, stretching, bending, they do a lot of things. Now, if I take a regular GUV with no tubes, for sure it's going to rupture if I try to aspirate it. But the red blood cells, they don't rupture. So because the red blood cell has a asymmetry, and there might be tubes which will help them to make robust, like what we showed. So it also helps for the cells to not rupture or to resist more mechanical stress and to be more robust, to have these tubes. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is kicking, which is like always there, whether the system is with pumps, without pumps. So if I have pumps, it's an ion pump. So of course I have to feed in energy. I have to provide ATP for it to function. I'll come back to that. But whether it is pumping or not, there are always kick from the solute on the membrane, and that results in the fluctuations of the membrane, which we can see in the microscope. So here is one publication where we showed that we can actually count the number of pumps which are in the membrane. So I made these vesicles, they are nice, fluctuating. I could add the ATP, then the pumps start to function. If I don't add, they don't function, they are in a passive state. So I can switch on and off the activity of the pump. But then we have to know how many of them are there before we actually can say something about the transport, like how much hydrolytic activity we can measure, but we want to know how many pumps are there in the membrane. So we can quantify that just by counting them if we do a super resolution microscopy, which we did, and immunolabeling. And so we can count them, and we could also put them in different composition, with the membrane with different composition. And then we precisely know which phase is what, because the bilayer thickness is different for different phases. So which we can measure. So we have a zero resolution in nanometer by using this technique. So we can measure the bilayer thickness, we can measure the height of the protein which is protruding out of the membrane, and then we can count them wherever they are. And then we can also in this way map the distribution, spatial distribution. So we do all that. So this is just a movie to show that how we make patches before we scan. So here I show you the probability histogram for orientation and density for the pump. And this was not so bad when we compared it with the theoretical estimate. So we could have a system in vitro which is capable of transporting ion across the membrane. Then when we go back now to fluctuations by knowing how many are there and whether they are pumping or not, and whether they are sitting there or not, and how they are sitting, we are now go back to fluctuations, and then we start looking at the fluctuations, correlations of the fluctuations. And then when we do that, we first of all see a very clear difference between active and non-active system. And moreover, we find that we could actually extract the turnover time of the pump from the fluctuations. And what I mean by turnover time, it's the time it takes to complete one cycle. So it pumps 3 sodium out, 2 sodium in, 2 potassium in, and this is one cycle. And how much time it takes. And that can be tuned depending on the conditions, and we can actually extract that from the fluctuations when it's pumping. And if when it's not pumping, then we just have Milner's upfront relaxation time. So the fluctuations actually carry a lot of information. Then in such system where we have a composition of the membrane which is complex, just not single composition like one phase, but we have different fluid coexistence. And then if we see such phases in the microscope, such giant vesicles, you will see 2 macroscopic phases like liquid ordered, liquid disordered, because what we are seeing is on the micron scale. But when we do super resolution microscopy in this one of these phases, like in this case it was liquid ordered phase, what we find is that actually protein is stabilizing phases, small regions of the opposite phase by localizing at the interface. So they kind of form microimmersion. And to make this quantitative, we had to quantify the protein orientation. We had to quantify the protein protrusion, how high and low it is in the membrane. We had to quantify the membrane phase, which will be different for different phase around the protein and away from the protein. And then we found that, so here in A, you just see these bright spots are protein. The green and red line just shows the thickness of the membrane up and down because 2 phases have different thickness. In B, it's just this proteins inside the ellipse in A. And then in C, this is the arrow for one of the protein where you see different colors which are actually the height, the thickness of the bilayer around the protein. So this is actually a color map showing the thickness, and it goes from 4 nanometer to 0 and -1, which means you have objects of different Z heights. And then we quantify for 103 proteins, their orientation, because that has to be protein. It should not be a dirt or something. And then we quantify the phases, and then we found that most of the proteins are actually sitting at the interface. And when we then image the region which they are stabilizing, we find that they are the small kind of droplets of other phase. So if I go to macroscopic liquid ordered phase, I find there are small droplets of liquid disordered phase, which are stabilized by the protein at the interface. So that's why we call it microemulsion. So to summarize, I started the talk by saying that there is matter, and to get life out of matter, it's a big question, but most of the matter is non-living, whereas cells or life, it's something active matter or living. So what is this transition zone? But in any case, to understand this transition zone, there are different kind of possibilities one can take, which I will show you what are the different possibilities. But in general, if something like coronavirus has to divide and multiply and survive, it has to find a host cell because it doesn't have ATP. So even though we have non-living things and the matter which is not active and not living, there is a coupling between the two, which one needs to understand for their function. And then even these budding are important for example, in endocytosis. I mean, whenever something has to come from outside, bind to the membrane, it should go in. There are membrane deformation, then penetration, then fission. So all these things we could actually show in the lab without having any activity. But in cell, there is always activity going on, exchange of mass, energy, and information, and it's a non-equilibrium system. But also membranes are a lot of things membranes can do without having an active source of energy. So we could follow a route to understand matter to life transition. It could be bottom up, like you start from non-living and try to go to living, or it could be top bottom, where, for example, this was a system I worked with Jan, where we had cells and then we removed the cytoskeleton. So this is called giant plasma membrane vesicle, and we could study that. So I spoke to you mostly about bottom up way of understanding this transition, and mostly by using giant vesicle system. And then this is an animation just to show that membranes, there are many membrane bound organelles in the cell. So in general, for example, cell membrane, there are other things, nuclear membrane. So there are other membrane less organelles also in the cell. There are a lot of things which are not bound by membrane, but the membrane clearly it plays an important role. For example, nuclear envelope, and then this endoplasmic cytoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, rough and soft, where the ribosomes are the places where the proteins are synthesized, and then they are packed into these small vesicles, so they can be transferred to Golgi, where they could be functionalized. So again, membrane, Golgi apparatus again has membrane bound organelle. So if we go on trying to understand each of these compartments, I mean, there is a lot of physics, and spontaneous curvature is one of the physical quantity that we can measure now. So that could be a way to actually understand what these asymmetric membranes are doing in the cell. And it's just not enough to say that membranes are not playing a big role because they're not active. There is a lot membranes can do. So what I showed you today is that we could create such membrane compartments, and we could change. We could have a solvent asymmetry, we could have a leaflet asymmetry, we could put proteins, we could have transport, and we could have different shape instabilities in the form of tubules, buds, microemulsion. The compartment can divide, it can transport. And if we keep on increasing the spontaneous curvature, it can actually divide the compartment, is what I showed you. And then, I mean, physicists have been studying biological systems. So here are some of the physicists who actually studied the biological systems. So yeah, so biological systems are actually soft matter system, and their function can be understood by biophysics. So here I leave you with this last slide, where it shows the topics that I try to talk to you. For example, budding, compartmentalization, fluidity, fission, tension tuning, and all these are important for the life, and it's just a matter of fact. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tripta. There are questions. Please go ahead. Raise your hand so I can go ahead. So I had a question about the relaxation time of the the pumps that you mentioned. I didn't understand how you measured them.
Yeah, so it's like we have these fluctuations. For example, this is the movie of fluctuations. So we can see it in the microscope, and then we maybe I have a slide, extra slide. Yeah. So so we look at these fluctuations, and then what we are measuring is what are the deviations of these of the membrane around the sphere. So fluctuations, and then we take that in along the radius of a GOV, and then we have a height deformation basically, which is U, and then from those correlations, we could actually say a lot about the relaxation time. So we just quantify that in the microscope. So we just take images and then we measure it. Actually, we have to measure it for each vesicle at the equatorial plane. We do it, and then we use this deformation energy, and then from that, if we want to look at the dynamics, so we just find an autocorrelation of those deformations. And I mean, if you just use a simple Langevin equation, then you will get a relaxation time to fit to those.
This is the relaxation time of the membrane deformations, right? I thought you were saying about the pumps, the turnover time of the pumps.
So if when the pump is active, what we found that when the pump is active is that the relaxation time is not decaying with the same time scale as it is when the pumps are not pumping. So we had to fit two exponential in order to extract the relaxation time. And one of the relaxation time we got was independent of the length scale. And that was related to the pump turnover cycle of the pump. Whereas the other one was related to the length scale, which is the Milnor-Safran relaxation time. And so we could measure the turnover cycle by quantifying the magnitude of the fluctuations, the time correlation.
Okay. Other questions? Dhruvaditya, go ahead.
Hi, Tripta.
Hi.
Just can we be sure that the buds are actually attached, or I mean, is there always a neck, or has the buds actually gone through a topological change?
Yeah, so
what I mean is there is another contribution to the energy which comes from the Gauss-Bonnet term, right?
Yeah.
So if there is a topological change, then that term comes into play.
Yes. So we don't consider any change in topology here. But of course, when there is a fission,
right, exactly.
Two separate compartments, but then there will be a hole in the.
But that's not the case here.
No, so from the instance of deformation till the formation of a stable neck, we don't have a change in topology. But when it fission, then of course we have two separate compartments which are no more connected. So we don't. It is possible. So what I learned is that what people call the neck as a wormhole in 3 dimension. So I don't know, I'm not expert on this, how to explain this, but we don't consider any change in topology till the time that is closed.
Thank you.
I see there's a question from Vidya Nanjundaya. I'll just read it out. So Vidya asks, are people exploring the dynamics of mitochondrial morphologies along the lines you discussed?
I mean, if I have a way of doing the experiment, I will be, but so far I have not seen a paper. But in abroad, there are people who actually working with in vitro systems where they are reconstituting different proteins, and it will be actually very nice and try to study these kind of shape in case of mitochondria, but I'm not aware of that. But it's obvious that one can quantify these. I mean, these are the physical quantities that one should quantify. So yes, but I'm sorry, I'm not aware of if people have actually published it. Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay, so if not, let's thank Tripta for a very nice talk. You can thank digitally by some reactions.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to interact.
Thank you, Tripta. Thanks, everyone.